Hello. How's everybody today? Thank you for being here. It's a busy day around the country. Mark and I recognize the tragedy of Nevada this week, and at this point I'm glad to say that it doesn't seem to have a terrorism nexus. That's not always the outcome, but our hearts and our prayers go out to all the individuals who were affected, both directly and indirectly, and can assure you that from an Intelligence Committee standpoint and the agencies, they're providing as many assets to local law enforcement and to those people that are tasked with investigation of this unbelievable act. So we're here to update you and the American people about the investigation into Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. When we started this investigation on 23 January of this year, we had a very clear focus. We were focused on an evaluation of the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment of Russia's involvement in our 2016 election. Additionally, the investigation was to look into any collusion by either campaign during the 2016 elections. The third piece was an assessment of the ongoing Russian active measures, including information and influence campaigns that may still exist and may be ongoing. The investigation started with those three buckets of interest. Now we're over 100 interviews later, which translates to 250 plus hours of interviews, almost 4,000 pages of transcripts, almost 100,000 pages of documents reviewed by our staff and some by members. It includes highly classified intelligence reporting. It includes emails, campaign documents, and technical cyber analysis products. The committee has held 11 open hearings this calendar year that have touched on Russia's interference in U.S. elections. I can say that our dedicated Russia investigative staff have literally worked 6 to 7 hours a day since 23 January to get us to the point we are today.
6 to 7 days a week.
6 to 7 days a week, excuse me. So far, in the interview process, we have interviewed everybody who had a hand or a voice into the creation of the Intelligence Community Assessment. We have spent 9 times the amount of time that the community spent putting the ICDA together, reviewing the ICA, and reviewing all the supporting documents that went in it. But in addition to that, the things that were thrown on the cutting room floor that they might not have found appropriate for the ICA itself, but we may have found of relevance to our investigation. We have interviewed every official of the Obama administration to fully understand what they saw, what clarity and transparency they had into Russia involvement, and more importantly, what they did or did not do and what drove those actions. Again, I'm reminded that we will come out with a finding at some point, and part of that hopefully will be recommendations as to changes we need to make. So we've tried to think as thoroughly through this as we can. We have interviewed literally individuals from around the world. So for those of you that choose to stake out when the next witness is coming, there's some that have snuck through because you don't know who they are. Now, it's safe to say that the inquiry has expanded slightly. Initial interviews and document review generated hundreds of additional requests on our part for information. It identified many leads that expanded our initial inquiry. The volume of work done by the staff has prepared the committee to look at some areas of our investigation that we hope will very soon reach some definite conclusion, but we're not there yet. We're not ready to close them. One of those areas is the ICA itself. Given that we have interviewed everybody who had a hand in the ICA, I think there is general consensus among members and staff that we trust the conclusions of the ICA, but we don't close our consideration of it in the unlikelihood that we find additional information through the completion of our investigation. The Obama administration's response to Russian interference. As I said, we have interviewed every person within the administration. They have volunteered and they have been unbelievably cooperative to come in and share everything they knew, and in most cases were interviewed for over 2 hours. The meeting at the Mayflower. Let me be specific. These are not issues that are closed. We have not come to any final conclusions. We have interviewed 7 individuals that attended the Mayflower event. The testimony from all 7 were consistent with each other, but we understand that with the current investigation open, there may be additional information we find that pulling that thread may give us some additional insight that we don't see today. Changes to the platform committee. And again, I'm addressing some things that have been written by you in this room, and they may not have been on our chart, but we felt that we had to dig deeply into them. We have, the committee staff has interviewed every person involved in the drafting of the campaign platform. Campaign staff was attempting to implement what they believed to be guidance, to be strong, to be a strong ally in Ukraine, but also leave the door open for better relations with Russia. I'm giving you the feedback we got from the individuals who were in the room making the decisions. Again, not closed, open for the continuation. The last one I want to cover is the Comey Memos. This topic has been hotly debated, and the committee is satisfied that our involvement with this issue has reached a logical end as it relates to the Russia investigation. Now again, this is not something that we've closed, but we have exhausted every person that we can talk to get information that's pertinent to us relative to the Russia investigation. Questions that you might have surrounding Comey's firing are better answered by the General Counsel or by the Justice Department, not the Select Committee of Intelligence in the United States Senate. There are concerns that we continue to pursue. Collusion. The committee continues to look into all evidence to see if there was any hint of collusion. Now, I'm not going to even discuss initial findings because we haven't any. We've got a tremendous amount of documents still to go through. And just to put in perspective, I said we've done over 100 interviews, over 250 hours. We currently have booked, for the balance of this month, 25 additional interviews. That may not end up being the total, but as of today, there are 25 individuals booked to meet with our staffs before the end of this month alone pertaining to the Russian investigation. We have more work to do as it relates to collusion, but we're developing a clearer picture of what happened. What I will confirm is that the Russian intelligence service is determined, clever, and I recommend that every campaign and every election official take this very seriously as we move into this November's election and as we move into preparation for the 2018 election. I'm going to ask the Vice Chairman to cover the other areas that we're in the process of pursuing.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I want to say at the outset again, I'm very proud of this committee. I'm proud of the way the committee has acted. I'm proud of our staff and the enormous amount of work they've done. I know the Chairman and I see many of you daily in the hallways and know that this feels like it's taking a long time. It is taking a long time. But getting it right and getting all the facts is what we owe the American people. And as we've seen, you know, for example, you know, stories that emerged in the late summer around, you know, Mr. Trump Jr.'s meeting or the possibilities of a Trump Tower in Moscow. You know, Chairman and I would love to find ways to close things down, but we also still see strains and threads that we need to continue to pursue. I want to touch on two subjects. The first is, and echoing what Richard's already said, the Russian active measures efforts did not end on Election Day 2016. They were not only geared at the United States of America. We have seen Russian active measures take place in France. We've seen concerns raised in the Netherlands. We've seen concerns raised in Germany. And we need to be on guard. One of the things that is particularly troubling to both of us is the fact that it's become evident that 21 states' electoral systems were not all penetrated, but there was at least trying to open the door in these 21 states. It has been very disappointing to me, and I believe the chairman as well, that it took 11 months for the Department of Homeland Security to reveal those 21 states, and still don't know why exactly last Friday was the date they chose to reveal that information, but still believe there needs to be a more aggressive whole-of-government approach in terms of protecting our electoral system. Remember, to make a change, even in a national election, doesn't require penetration into 50 states, arguably. And states like the chairman's and mine could be key. You could pick 2 or 3 states in 2 or 3 jurisdictions and alter an election. And I believe in a state like mine, where in Virginia and New Jersey, in 34 days, we have elections. I'm glad to see the DHS has said they are going to up their game and particularly help those states with elections that are happening this year. But we need to make sure that there is a organized, again, whole-of-government approach. I know in Virginia, for example, even before we discovered that we were one of the 21 states, I think the state electoral board, in an abundance of caution, decertified one set of machines that were touch screens that didn't have kind of a paper ballot or a paper trail to this. One of the things we wanted to emphasize with this briefing, that this is an ongoing concern, and that if states don't proactively move forward, very shortly we'll be getting into primary seasons early on in 2018, and this is an ongoing challenge. And again, I'd point out, even after last week, Wisconsin, Texas, and California still have some lack of clarity about whether the appropriate individuals were notified. I also want to raise an issue that the chairman and I have been working jointly on as well, and that is the Russians' use of social media platforms. Social media platforms that increasingly the vast majority of us turn to for information, for news, in a way that is very different. If you look, for example, in the realm of political advertising, we've seen a over 700% increase in the use of digital political advertising between 2012 and 2016. The expectation is that may double or triple again in terms of the next election cycle because of the ability to so target voters. I was concerned at first that some of these social media platform companies did not take this threat seriously enough. I believe they are recognizing that threat now. They have provided us with information. We think it's important that the 3 companies that we've invited, Google, Twitter, and Facebook, will appear in a public hearing so that Americans can again hear both about how we're going to protect, I would argue, 3 areas. One, making sure that if you see an ad that appears on a social media site, that Americans can know whether the source of that ad was generated by foreign entities. 2, to make sure that if you see a story that is trending and becoming more popular, whether that trending is because a series of Americans are liking that story or liking that particular page whether that's generated by real individuals or whether that's generated by bots, or in some cases, it may be false identity, falsely identified accounts. For example, Facebook has indicated between 30 and 50,000 such accounts were taken down in France because due to Russian interference. And third, just the notion that both of us have been in politics a long time. If you have somebody running an ad for you against you, you ought to be able to go down and take at least a look at that content, the same way that if ads are run for or against you on TV, radio, or newsprint, you can at least get a look at that content. This is an ongoing process, but we're seeing increasing levels of cooperation. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chairman and be happy to take questions.
Let me just say that many of you have asked us, are we going to release the Facebook ads? We don't release documents provided to our committee, period. Let me say it again. The Senate Intelligence Committee does not release documents provided by witnesses, companies, whatever the classification. It's not a practice that we're going to get into. Clearly, if any of the social media platforms would like to do that, we're fine with them doing it, because we've already got scheduled an open hearing, because we believe the American people deserve to hear firsthand. And just to remind people, on October the 25th, we will have another open hearing, number 12, with Michael Cohen. On November 1st, we have invited the social media companies that Mark mentioned to be our guest at an open hearing, and we feel confident that they will take us up on it. As it relates to the Steele dossier, unfortunately, the committee has hit a wall. We have, on several occasions, made attempts to contact Mr. Steele, to meet with Mr. Steele, to include personally the vice chairman and myself as two individuals making that connection. Those offers have gone unaccepted. The committee cannot really decide the credibility of the dossier without understanding things like who paid for it, who are your sources and subsources. We're investigating a very expansive Russian network of interference in U.S. elections. And though we have been incredibly enlightened at our ability to rebuild backwards the Steele dossier up to a certain date, getting past that point has been somewhat impossible. And I say this because I don't think we're going to find any intelligence products that unlock that key to pre-June of 16. My hope is that Mr. Steele will make a decision to meet with either Mark and I or the committee or both, so that we can hear his side of it, versus for us to depict in our findings what his intent or what his actions were. And I say that to you, but I also say it to Chris Steele. Potential witnesses that we might ask to come in the future. I strongly suggest that you come in and speak with us. If we believe that you have something valuable to bring to the committee, if you don't voluntarily do it, I will assure you today, you will be compelled to do it. I can compel you to come, I can't compel you to talk. But that will be in a very public, done in a very public way if in fact you turn down the private offer. The committee has proven to be balanced, professional, and that we're willing to listen to everybody. Let me say in closing, for those following our investigation in the press, I want you to know that you only see glimpses of the amount of work the committee's done. We're doing much of our work behind closed doors to ensure the privacy and the protection of witnesses and sensitive sources and methods. It's become increasingly clear that the committee has stayed focused on building the foundation to be able to finish our investigation thoroughly and in an accountable way. I'm confident today that when we started, we chose wisely by choosing our professional staff to do this investigation, and not to the talking heads all around the country that suggested we couldn't do this unless we went out and hired a whole new group. And I think the numbers here reflect that. Ultimately, we look forward to completing our work and presenting our findings to the public. I can't set a date as to when that will be. Mark can't set a date as to when that can be. We will share with you when we have exhausted every thread of intelligence, every potential witness that can contribute anything to this. I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, tell you that there's been value to everybody we've met with. But if we hadn't met with them, then you would have questioned us as to why we didn't. Now, the truth is, nobody in this room, and Mark and I might be included in it, none of us in this room may know everybody we've met with. We're not going to share who we interview. We're not going to share what we ask, and we're certainly not going to share what they tell us. We're not going to share with you the documents that we got. But when you receive 100,000 documents plus, a large group of that coming from the Trump campaign alone, when you look at the country's most sensitive intelligence products, let me assure you, we're going to get the best view of what happened that anybody could possibly get. At the end of this process, we will be sure that we present to the American people our findings as best we have been able to accumulate them. So with that, I'll be happy to open it for questions. Chad?
Thank you, thank you. Have you seen any evidence of a nexus between these Russian Facebook ads with the Trump campaign or with any political candidate?
Chad, we haven't even had our hearing with any of the social media platforms. I think if you look from 10,000 feet, the subject matter of the ads seems to have been to create chaos in every group that they could possibly identify in America. From a standpoint of any involvement, let us have the opportunity to have these folks in, ask them the questions. In many cases, they didn't even take advantage of some of the most technical targeting tools that exist within those social media companies. So I would defer answering your question until we've completed the investigation.
Let me just add that, I believe, and I think you will see that there will be more forensics done by these companies. Again, when we just look at scale, France versus the United States, for example, on one of the platforms, Facebook, in terms of what happened, I think they've got some more work to do, and I'm pleased to say I think they are out doing that work now.
Senator, the president has said repeatedly that any talk of collusion is a hoax. I mean, you've gone through all these documents, you've interviewed all these people. At this point, is the president right? Is this a hoax?
I'm going to let you guys quote the president and ask him questions about what he says. It's not going to be the committee. We're going through a very
Do you have
difficult
any
process.
evidence to suggest, to rule out that the president knew anything about any of these contacts that occurred between any of his associates and the Russians?
Let me go back and say, because I thought I was pretty clear, that the issue of collusion is still open, that we continue to investigate both intelligence and witnesses, and that we're not in a position where we will come to any type of temporary finding on that until we've completed the process. Casey?
You say that the issue of collusion is still open. Are you pursuing the question of whether there's a link between the ads that appeared on social media sites and the Trump campaign?
Well, let me just say that I'll let Mark address it if he'd like to. If there was any connection, that would be pertinent to our investigation of Russia's influence in the elections. We have had incredible access and cooperation by those social media companies that have been in. Some of them have been interviewed twice. At the end of the day, we'll be prepared to ask the right questions that may answer some of your questions at that open hearing.
But we also have to get the universe first. I was concerned on the front end that the first pass was not a thorough enough pass. For example, I cited the fact that one entity that the only ads that were produced were those that were paid for in rubles. Obviously, There are various forms of payment. So I think the companies are increasingly understanding that their actions need to match their public statements, that they realize how important it is to maintain the integrity of our democratic process.
Would you call on Facebook to release those ads?
I think at the end of the day, it's important that the public sees these ads.
Member, two questions. You talked about the level of cooperation that you've gotten from Obama administration officials. Can you characterize the level of cooperation and candor you've seen from Trump campaign officials and those in the Trump orbit?
I can't think of a Trump campaign official that we have asked to come in that has not come in. That's pretty accurate. There's some individuals that may have been involved in the Trump campaign that to this point we might have limited the scope of our questions, but with the full intent of them coming back when we knew a little bit more and they pulled a few more intelligence threads.
And so far, when you compare what they've said to you to the documents that you've reviewed, do you find that they've been truthful by and large?
I don't think that, I think our interviews to this point, outside of the 5 specific areas of buckets that we knew exactly what the universe of people we wanted to talk to, we knew what we were trying to find out, that we're very much in an exploratory mode trying to piece together what people did, where they were, who they talked to. In most cases, we have accessed email records, text messages, phone records voluntarily. Usually when you get something like that voluntarily, somebody's probably going to tell you the truth when they answer the questions. But the reason that we can't definitively answer some of your questions today is we will take everything that our staff has put into transcripts, and we will test that against every piece of intelligence and other interviews that we've done. To suggest that we've done that to everybody thoroughly would be misleading you. So let us go through that process. But I will assure you that if somebody has come in and not been truthful with us, we will catch them on that, and they will come back, and that will be the subject of great intents to be honest.
Senators, questions for both of you. Based on the work done so far, what's your assessment of what the Russians did do in 2016, what they're doing now, and what portends for the future?
I would just say, I think there is a large consensus that they hacked into political files, released those files in an effort to influence the election. We think they actively tried to at least test the vulnerabilities of 21 states' electoral systems. And we feel that they used the social media firms both in terms of paid advertising and what I believe is more problematic, but created false accounts and others that would drive interest towards stories or groups. And generally those stories or groups were to sow chaos and drive division in our country. And I think that the pattern that they used in America, they have used in other nations around the world. And I fear sometimes if you add up all they've spent, that was a decent rate of return for them, unfortunately.
Let me add to it if I can. We can certifiably say that no vote totals were affected, that the tallies are accurate, the outcome of the election based upon the count of votes, they did not in any way, shape, or form that we've been able to find alter that. I want to reiterate something that Mark said. You can't walk away from this and believe that Russia is not currently active in trying to create chaos in our election process. I assume that the same tactics that we saw in Montenegro and in France, in Belgium, and in the United States will continue to be tested within our structure of the election process here at home.
Thank you, Senator. Pivoting off that point, you just noted that Facebook, they say 10 million people saw their ads, there was an information campaign waged against one candidate by the Russians, and of course, they probed 21 states, perhaps more, that we didn't catch. So can you definitively look at the American public, Senator Burr, and say that the election was not influenced in any way by this massive Russian operation?
Well, let me take issue with your premise of your question. Neither Mark or I said that there was a campaign targeted against one. We're looking at both campaigns.
Well, that's what the ICA has said.
The ICA did not look at collusion of the campaigns. The ICA looked at Russian, let me finish. Russian involvement in the election process. We're in agreement with that. We have not come to any determination on collusion or Russia's preferences. If we used solely the social media advertising that we have seen, there's no way that you can look at that and say that that was to help the right side of the ideological chart and not the left, or vice versa. They were indiscriminate. One of the things that's most challenging to this investigation is, with the exception of certain pieces that have already been discussed, it seems that the overall theme of the Russian involvement in the U.S. elections was to create chaos at every level. And I would tell you the fact that we're sitting here 9 months later investigating it, they have been pretty darn successful.
Chairman Burr, how would you rate the administration and the country's response to this in terms of preventing something like this from happening in the future? And how ready are we for Virginia's election and 2018? What more needs to be done?
I'll let Mark address Virginia. But let me just say this. Our role is not to necessarily suggest here are the things we need to do. Our investigation should create a roadmap for committees of the proper jurisdiction to follow, for states to follow. Mark and I made a decision to take the initiative in our authorization bill that we require in our authorization bill that there be a designated person in every state who has a security clearance to be briefed on election issues. We couldn't say Secretary of State because that's not the case in every state, but we felt compelled with what we had learned to make sure that just the fact that somebody wasn't cleared at a high enough level would put a state out there not being notified. So we've made some steps in the right direction. As we see those things that we think it's appropriate for us to do, we will do them. If we see that it's not appropriate for us to do, we will hopefully convey that in a way that presents a roadmap for somebody else.
Are you satisfied that the administration is paying a close enough level of attention to this that they're appropriately concerned?
And I appreciate what Richard just said. I think you're putting this impetus in our intel bill. I mean, it seemed very strange to me that somehow there was an excuse being given, we can't tell the top election official because he or she may not have a high enough clearance. I'm glad to see, as of last Friday, DHS has changed that position. But I do believe we need more, and this is, I would say that, whether it's this administration or any administration, a whole of government approach about protecting our electoral system, but we need a whole of government approach for that matter, maybe a whole of society approach in terms of our cyber vulnerabilities across the board. Came from a hearing this morning where there was pretty uniform consensus that the Equifax breach, where most of our private personal financial information may be in the hands now of rogue elements, that there wasn't appropriate cyber protections there. So this is that this is why I characterize some of this as Wild Wild West, this whole realm in cyber. We all need to step up our game.
Senator, has the Russian lawyer who
I'm gonna
met
go
with
right
Donald
here.
Trump, has she
Thank you. I'm going to go
come
right
before
here.
you?
Do you think that this report needs to be done, your conclusion needs to happen before the 2018 election in order to warn people about what can happen next? And where do you think the most work needs to be done?
I'm not going to set an artificial deadline, but I think Mark and I would agree. We've got to make our facts as it relates to Russia's involvement in our election public prior to the primaries getting started in 2018, which means sometime the first year. It's still my aspirational goal to finish the entire investigation this calendar year. Don't think I've changed. But when we started 9 months ago, I saw 3 buckets, and today I talked about 5 or 6. So I didn't dream then what would expand to. I can't predict what witnesses are going to share with us that might lead us in a different direction.
And one of the things, that again, I think that the committee has been very good at is, you know, we're going to follow the facts. And we want to do it as quickly as possible, but we want to do it right and follow the facts.
Is the Russian attorney going to come through? The Russian attorney met with Donald Trump Jr. She's offered to come in open committee. Have you reached out to her? Is she one of the 25 on your list?
How do you know we haven't already
I
interviewed?
didn't say you did. I'm asking.
Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for both of you. Is there any progress forward on creating legislation that would create new rules for regulating how political advertising works on these platforms that Republicans have discussed with Democrats? I know that you and Senator Klobuchar are working on
Yeah,
that.
Senator Klobuchar and I are working on something, and that would, I believe, be the lightest touch possible. And that light touch would focus on making sure that foreign paid-for advertising doesn't penetrate our political system, and that there was an ability to at least look at the content that appears in political campaigns the same way that, similar to the rules that the rest of media already have. I want to make sure we get, and we're hoping to finish that draft in the coming days. And I can assure you that one of the first people I want to share that with is my chairman, because this ought to be an area where I think there would be broad bipartisan consensus. My hope, at least from some of the comments of some of the companies, I've heard at least comments that they are open to this type of disclosure.
Let me just state fact today. It is illegal today for foreign money to find its way into U.S. elections. So it's not like we've got to rewrite some laws. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to get clarification on this. So far you have not been able to verify the intelligence community's assessment that Russia was weighing in on the side of Donald Trump?
We feel very confident that the ICA's accuracy is going to be supported by our committee. We're not willing to close the issue, given the nature of the rest of the investigation, that we might get a thread of intelligence that suggests possibly an area of the ICA that our interpretation is different. So we're leaving it open. It's not closed. And I think any smart investigation would stay open until we've completed.
And that's, again, let me just add,
Yeah.
that's one of the things we're trying to be very careful here is Richard mentioned some of these meetings where we've talked to most folks. We also know, this has to be talked through with all of the balance of the committee members. We're being, I think, extra cautious here, saying we're not reaching final conclusions until we've had those conversations with all the.
Could there ever be a point where the meddling from Russia was so overwhelming that it could lead to negating the results of the election?
Maybe that's a theory people are working under. All I can tell you is that the votes were counted, one person won, and that's how it's going to stay.
Prior to the release of your committee's report, will there be any coordination on what the Senate Judiciary Committee has found in its own investigation?
Listen, we're focused on our investigation. Everybody has their jurisdictional lanes. My hope is that they stay within those lanes. We talk, I won't say regularly, but when we need to, with the special counsel. The special counsel is focused on criminal acts. We're not focused on criminal acts. If we find one, then they're the first phone call we make.
Senator Burr, the president is the commander-in-chief and he's charged with protecting the country, but he hasn't really spoken out on this issue other than to call it a hoax. Do you want to see him lead some kind of effort, speak out, do something tangible to protect the country from these, what you consider to be ongoing attacks from Russia?
Listen, I think the vice chairman alluded to the fact that though it was slow getting DHS to recognize this, it didn't take as long as it did for the last administration to run the clock on it. So we're not trying to look back and point to things that were done wrong. Everybody's done things wrong.
I want to talk about prospectively. Should the president now take what you're saying today, speak out against it, and lead some kind of
I'm not asking
formal
the-
effort to protect the
I'm
country
not
from
asking the
Russia?
president to take the briefing that we give at a press briefing about progress and assume that that in any way, shape, or form fully encapsulates what our final report will say. What I will say is what the Vice Chairman pointed out, that the Department of Homeland Security has taken a different posture. It's his administration. I'm sure they had his direction or his leadership's direction. We're pleased with the progress that they're making, but some of the things that hopefully we will be able to point out will be important steps to be incorporated in their thought process moving forward. Thank you, guys.
Thank
We
you
gotta
all
run.
very much.